What would you do if a dying billionaire offered you $50,000 for just 1 month of work, but you discovered his secret could destroy hundreds of lives? Have you ever been so desperate for money that you'd consider anything? That moment when your back's against the wall, and every door seems closed except one, the door you're terrified to walk through. 28-year-old Camila Rodriguez knew that feeling all too well. Every morning at 5 a.m. she'd wake up in her cramped East Houston apartment, pull on her scrubs, and prepare for another exhausting day at Memorial Methodist Hospital's oncology ward. The fluorescent hospital lights had become her second home, watching over terminal patients who reminded her daily that time was the most precious thing money couldn't buy. But time was exactly what Camila's family was running out of. Her father, Carlos Rodriguez, had spent 23 years breathing in toxic chemicals at Houston's petrochemical plants. The same refineries that powered America's economy were now slowly killing him from the inside out. His rare lung disease required experimental treatment that insurance companies dismissed as too costly. A $200,000 price tag that might as well have been $200 million for a working-class family already drowning in medical debt. Camila's parents had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but calloused hands and unshakable faith in the American dream. Carlos worked double shifts operating heavy machinery, while her mother Rosa cleaned office buildings until midnight, all so their children could have opportunities they never had. Camila became the first in her family to attend college, graduating nursing school with honors and plans to eventually earn her master's degree. Those dreams now collected dust. Every paycheck went straight to her parents' mounting medical bills. Camila picked up double shifts whenever possible, surviving on vending machine coffee and 3 hours of sleep. Her own apartment was a studio with a broken air conditioner and neighbors who played music until 2 a.m., but she barely noticed anymore. Her world had shrunk to two places: the hospital where she fought to save other people's fathers, and the waiting room where she watched her own father slowly fade away. The experimental treatment in Boston offered hope. Clinical trials showed remarkable success rates for patients with Carlos's exact condition. But hope came with a price tag that felt like mockery. How could life-saving medicine exist while remaining financially impossible for the people who needed it most? Camila had exhausted every option. Bank loans required collateral she didn't have. Medical crowdfunding raised $3,000 in 6 months. Even selling her car and moving back home with her parents wouldn't come close to the treatment cost. She was drowning in the cruelest kind of poverty, not the kind where you can't afford luxuries, but the kind where you can't afford to save the person you love most in the world. If you've ever felt trapped between family loyalty and doing what's right, hit that like button. Because Camila's story is about to take a turn that will challenge everything you think you know about impossible choices. But what if that choice led to the biggest revelation of your life? Because on a cold December evening, when Camila thought all hope was lost, a mysterious phone call would change everything. A call that would lead her into the world of a dying billionaire whose own secrets were far darker than anything she could have imagined. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while Camila was adjusting morphine drips for 3 different patients. Her supervisor approached with an unusual expression, part confusion, part curiosity. "There's a lawyer downstairs asking for you specifically. Says it's about a private nursing opportunity. Have you ever gotten an offer that seemed too good to be true? The kind that makes your heart race while your brain screams warnings." Richard Steinberg wore a $5,000 suit and carried himself like someone accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. He chose a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria, sliding a business card across the table with the practiced precision of someone who'd done this before. "My client requires private nursing care for approximately 1 month. Terminal pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He wants to spend his final weeks at home rather than in institutional settings. Camilla nodded politely. Private nursing wasn't unusual, though most families contacted agencies directly rather than sending attorneys to recruit specific nurses. The compensation is $50,000. Camilla's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. $50,000 was more than she made in an entire year of double shifts and overtime. It was exactly what her father needed for his experimental treatment, plus enough left over to pay down their crushing medical debt. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? $50,000 for 1 month of care. My client values discretion and professionalism above all else. Your reputation at Memorial Methodist is exemplary. The lawyer explained that his client was a businessman who preferred privacy during his final weeks. Round-the-clock care at his Austin residence, medication management, comfort measures, and detailed medical documentation. Standard palliative nursing with exceptional compensation. Why me specifically? Steinberg's smile never wavered. Your oncology experience and patient reviews spoke for themselves. My client researches his decisions thoroughly. What would you risk for your family's survival? Camilla stared at the contract Steinberg placed before her, watching numbers that could save her father's life dance across legal terminology she barely understood. The offer included housing at the client's ranch, meals provided, and full medical malpractice coverage through his personal physician. 2 days later, Camilla found herself driving through the gates of a 40,000-acre spread outside Austin. The main house rose from rolling hills like something from a magazine, native stone walls, expansive windows, wraparound porches that whispered of old Texas money. Guest quarters, barns, and outbuildings dotted the landscape, creating a self-contained world where privacy was guaranteed and outsiders weren't welcome. Scott Brandon met her at the front door. He was smaller than she'd expected for someone who commanded such wealth. 68 years old with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance. His handshake was firm despite the obvious weight loss and pale complexion that marked his advancing illness. Thank you for coming, Miss Rodriguez. I trust the arrangements are satisfactory. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions, yet underneath Camilla detected something unexpected, vulnerability, perhaps even fear. This wasn't just another wealthy patient demanding VIP treatment. Scott Brandon was genuinely afraid of dying alone. The guest suite was larger than Camilla's entire apartment, with a kitchenette, sitting area, and bedroom that overlooked pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. Everything was perfect, almost too perfect. High-end medical equipment had been installed in the master bedroom. Prescription medications were organized with military precision. Emergency protocols were posted in multiple locations. Someone had spent considerable time and money preparing for her arrival. Have you ever had to choose between your principles and your family? Drop a comment below, because Camilla was about to discover that $50,000 came with complications she never saw coming. Scott's medical records indicated standard end-stage pancreatic cancer requiring palliative care, but something felt off about the entire arrangement. Why recruit a specific nurse through legal intermediaries? Why pay 10 times the standard rate for routine terminal care? Why insist on such extreme privacy at a remote ranch? Most troubling of all, why did Scott Brandon keep asking questions about her family, her background, her opinions on justice and forgiveness? But Camilla had no idea what she was walking into. The first week at Brandon Ranch passed like a carefully choreographed dance between caregiver and patient. Camilla established medication schedules, monitored vital signs, and maintained the professional distance she'd perfected over 6 years of oncology nursing. Scott was a model patient, polite, cooperative, never demanding special treatment despite obvious wealth that surrounded them. But isolation has a way of breaking down walls that hospitals never could. Away from the constant interruptions of medical facilities, Camilla began noticing details that troubled her. Scott rarely slept more than 2 hours at a stretch, often pacing his study during late-night hours when pain medication should have provided relief. He kept detailed journals but wrote in them with trembling hands, as if every word caused physical discomfort. Most concerning were the phone calls he'd abruptly end whenever she entered his presence. "Do you know someone carrying a secret that's destroying them inside? The kind of burden that eats away at a person's soul until they become a shell of who they used to be." Scott Brandon was haunted. It started with fragments during his most vulnerable moments. Pain episodes that required increased morphine dosages would lower his defenses, allowing glimpses of whatever consumed his thoughts. He'd mutter about Louisiana, about families who deserved better, about decisions that seemed right at the time but were wrong, so terribly wrong. Camilla initially dismissed these comments as medication-induced confusion, but Scott's lucidity during other conversations suggested something deeper. His questions became more personal and probing. He wanted to know about her family's struggles, her father's illness, her thoughts on forgiveness and second chances. "Miss Rodriguez, do you believe someone can make amends for terrible mistakes, even if those mistakes hurt innocent people?" The question came during a routine evening medication check. Scott sat in his leather recliner, staring out at the ranch's rolling hills as sunset painted the sky crimson. His voice carried weight that had nothing to do with terminal illness. "I believe people can change, Mr. Brandon, but making amends requires facing the truth about what you've done." Something shifted in Scott's expression, relief mixed with terror, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff deciding whether to jump. His condition deteriorated rapidly during the 3rd week. The cancer was aggressive, but Camilla suspected emotional torment was accelerating his physical decline. He began having panic attacks during the night, calling out for someone named Carlos, which made Camilla's blood run cold since that was her father's name. "The Louisiana families," he whispered during one particularly bad episode. "They're still suffering, still dying, because of what I covered up." Camilla's nursing instincts kicked in. She adjusted his pain medication and stayed by his bedside until dawn, holding his hand while he drifted in and out of restless sleep. But her mind raced with questions. What happened in Louisiana? What families was he talking about? And why did his guilt seem so specifically connected to industrial illness, the same kind of disease slowly killing her father? The study became her obsession. Scott spent hours there when his strength permitted, surrounded by awards, photographs with politicians and business memorabilia that spoke of decades of success. But Camilla noticed he avoided one particular wall where a portrait of an elderly man hung beside a built-in bookshelf. When she mentioned the portrait, Scott's face went white. "That's my grandfather. He started this empire with one oil well in 1923. Everything I built came from his legacy." His voice broke on the word legacy, as if it tasted bitter in his mouth. Trust was building between them, despite their vastly different worlds. Camilla found herself genuinely caring about Scott's comfort and dignity during his final weeks. He wasn't just another wealthy patient demanding special treatment. He was a deeply wounded man seeking something that money couldn't buy. If you believe everyone deserves a chance at redemption, smash that subscribe button, because what Scott was about to reveal would test that belief to its absolute limits. "Miss Rodriguez," he said one evening as she prepared his nighttime medications, "there's something I need to show you. Something that could change everything for families like yours. But once you know the truth, there's no going back." His hands shook as he reached for the study keys he always kept in his pocket. "Are you sure you're ready for this responsibility?" Camilla looked into his eyes and saw desperation mixed with hope, the expression of a dying man who'd found someone he finally trusted with his darkest secrets. Then one night, everything changed when Scott showed her what was hidden in his vault. Scott's hands trembled as he pulled back the portrait of his grandfather, revealing a steel safe built directly into the wall. The combination lock required 3 separate number sequences, which he entered with the precision of someone who had memorized them through years of guilt-ridden practice. "The dates I'll never forget," he whispered. March 15th, 1987. April 2nd, 1987. May 30th, 1987. The vault door swung open with a soft click that seemed to echo through the study like a gunshot. Inside, Camilla saw stacks of documents, photographs, and recording equipment that filled every inch of available space. 37 years of carefully preserved evidence that Scott had never found the courage to reveal. Have you ever discovered something that changed everything you thought you knew? That moment when reality shifts beneath your feet and nothing will ever look the same again. "It started with cost-cutting measures," Scott began, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'd just acquired 3 refineries in Louisiana's chemical corridor. The purchase price was steep, and my board demanded immediate profit improvements to justify the investment." He pulled out the first stack of documents, internal company memos dating back to early 1987. Camilla read over his shoulder, her nursing background helping her understand the medical terminology scattered throughout the reports. Safety inspections had revealed critical flaws in the groundwater containment systems. Engineers recommended immediate repairs costing $2.3 million per facility. The board meeting minutes showed Scott's response: postpone non-essential maintenance until Q4. Market conditions don't support discretionary spending. "I told myself it was just business," Scott continued, lifting out photographs that made Camilla's stomach turn. Aerial shots of contaminated waterways, dead fish floating in streams that had once run clear, soil samples showing toxicity levels that exceeded safe limits by hundreds of times. The catastrophic leak occurred on March 15th, 1987. A containment wall that should have been repaired months earlier finally gave way, releasing thousands of gallons of industrial chemicals directly into the groundwater that supplied 3 rural communities. But the real horror was what came next. "We could have contained the damage immediately," Scott said, producing a recorded conversation between himself and his legal team. Emergency protocols existed for exactly this scenario. Full disclosure, immediate cleanup, victim compensation, and medical monitoring for affected families. Instead, Scott chose cover-up. The recordings revealed a conspiracy involving local politicians, environmental officials, and medical examiners who were all paid to minimize the disaster scope. Families reporting mysterious illnesses were told their symptoms were unrelated to the chemical release. Death certificates were falsified to hide cancer clusters. Soil and water test results were suppressed for decades. Camilla watched Scott's empire crumble before her eyes as he pulled out medical reports documenting the real impact. Birth defects among children born after the leak, rare cancers appearing at rates 40 times higher than national averages, respiratory diseases, neurological disorders, and immune system failures that destroyed entire family lines. Hundreds of victims, 37 years of suffering, all while Scott's company generated billions in profits from the same facilities that caused the contamination. "My God," Camilla breathed, staring at photographs of families whose stories mirrored her own father's struggle. These people, they never knew what made them sick. They deserved to know. They deserved compensation. They deserved justice. Scott's voice broke completely. "Instead, they got silence while I got richer." The scope of injustice was staggering. Camilla realized she was holding evidence that could trigger federal investigations, criminal prosecutions, and civil lawsuits worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This wasn't just corporate negligence, it was systematic murder disguised as business as usual. But the emotional impact went deeper than legal implications. Her father Carlos had spent 23 years breathing industrial chemicals just like these Louisiana families. The same lung disease, the same financial devastation, The same desperate search for treatments that insurance companies refused to cover. "Is this why you hired me?" Camilla asked. The pieces finally connecting. "Because my father. Because you understand what these families have endured. Because you have the medical knowledge to comprehend the evidence. Because you're the only person I've met with both the strength and integrity to handle this responsibility." Camilla found herself facing an impossible moral position. Patient confidentiality required protecting Scott's secrets, but hundreds of innocent families deserved justice that only this evidence could provide. The man who had committed these crimes was dying, but his victims continued suffering every single day. The moral complexity of justice versus loyalty tore at her conscience. Scott wasn't asking for forgiveness, he was asking for help in finally doing what should have been done 37 years ago. "What do you want from me?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would change her life forever. "I want to make this right before I die, but I need someone I trust to ensure the victims get justice even after I'm gone. Someone who won't let lawyers and corporations bury this evidence again." Scott looked directly into Camilla's eyes with desperate hope that she recognized from her own reflection during her father's darkest moments. "Will you help me give these families what they've been denied for 37 years? But the biggest shock was yet to come. Camilla stared at the evidence spread across Scott's desk, her mind racing through the implications of what she'd discovered. The weight of hundreds of families' suffering pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden she couldn't escape. "There's something else you need to know," Scott said quietly, reaching into the vault one final time. He pulled out a manila folder that looked different from the others, newer, more recently handled. Inside were documents that made Camilla's blood run cold. Medical records for Carlos Rodriguez, insurance claim denials, treatment facility recommendations, even copies of conversations between Camilla and her mother about experimental therapies they couldn't afford. "You researched my family," she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "This whole job, it wasn't random." Scott nodded slowly, shame etched across his features. "When I decided to finally confront what I'd done, I needed someone with specific qualities. Medical expertise to understand the evidence, personal experience with industrial illness to comprehend the victim's suffering. Most importantly, unshakable integrity to ensure justice would be served." Camilla felt her legs give way, sinking into the leather chair across from his desk. Everything she believed about their meeting, about the mysterious job offer, about the generous compensation, it had all been calculated. "You manipulated me. Used my father's illness to get what you needed. I researched you, yes, but I chose you because of who you are, not because of what you needed." Scott's voice carried conviction despite his physical weakness. Dozens of nurses had similar qualifications. Only one had dedicated her entire adult life to caring for others, while sacrificing her own dreams for family. He pulled out another document, a bank authorization form dated 3 days before Camilla had even accepted the job. "Your father's treatment in Boston has been fully funded regardless of your decision about this evidence. The experimental therapy, transportation costs, family accommodations, everything is covered whether you help me or not." Camilla stared at the authorization, her father's name typed in neat black letters beside a sum that represented hope she'd thought was impossible. "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Because 37 years ago, I made a choice that prioritized money over human life. I chose profit over people like your father, hard-working individuals who trusted their employers to keep them safe." Scott's eyes filled with tears. "I can't undo what I did to those Louisiana families, but I can ensure one more family doesn't suffer needlessly." The manipulation Camilla had felt moments before transformed into something more complex, understanding mixed with profound sadness for a man who'd carried such devastating guilt for decades. "You're dying, Mr. Brandon. Why does this matter so much now?" "Because legacy isn't measured by the wealth you accumulate or the empire you build. It's measured by the lives you impact and the justice you leave behind. He gestured toward the vault's contents. This evidence is my real inheritance, the only thing of value I can leave this world. Scott outlined his plan with the strategic precision that had built his business empire, but now focused on redemption rather than profit. Video confessions would be recorded explaining the cover-up and accepting full responsibility. Legal documents would transfer ownership of the evidence to Camila as a protected whistleblower. Federal prosecutors, environmental lawyers, and investigative journalists had already been discreetly contacted through intermediaries. Most importantly, a trust fund worth $500 million would be established using Scott's personal assets to provide immediate compensation for victims while avoiding lengthy court battles that might delay relief for years. I need someone I trust to oversee victim compensation and ensure families get the medical care they've been denied. Someone who understands both healthcare needs and what it means to fight for family. Camila realized she was being offered more than a job. She was being entrusted with the power to transform hundreds of lives while honoring the memory of a man seeking redemption in his final days. What if I'm not strong enough for this responsibility? You've been strong enough to work double shifts for 6 years while watching your father slowly die. You're strong enough to provide comfort to terminal patients who remind you daily of your own family's struggle. You're strong enough to choose integrity over easy money. Scott reached across the desk and gently took her hand. You're the strongest person I've ever met. For the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch, Camila saw Scott not as a wealthy patient or even as a man haunted by terrible secrets, but as a human being who'd found unexpected connection across impossible circumstances. If I do this, she said slowly, those families will finally get justice. But your company, your employees, everyone connected to your business, will face the consequences of decisions I made decades ago. That's justice, Miss Rodriguez. Real justice means accepting responsibility regardless of the cost. Camila looked at this dying billionaire who'd chosen her above all others to carry out his final act of redemption, and realized that human connection truly could transcend every barrier of class, wealth, and circumstance. I'll do it, she said, feeling the weight of hundreds of families' hopes settling on her shoulders. I'll help you make this right. Scott's smile was the first genuine expression of peace she'd seen from him since arriving at the ranch. If this story is touching your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it, because what happened next changed not just Camila's life, but hundreds of others. Scott Brandon passed away on a quiet January morning, his hand resting in Camila's as dawn broke over the Texas hills. His final words weren't about business deals or corporate achievements, but gratitude for finding someone who'd helped him transform his greatest shame into his most meaningful legacy. Thank you for showing me that redemption is always possible, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Promise me you'll see this through. Camila held his hand until his breathing stopped, then sat in silence as the man who'd terrified boardrooms for decades that had eluded him for 37 years. The disclosure process Scott had planned unfolded with surgical precision. Within hours of his death, federal prosecutors received detailed confessions and evidence packages. Environmental lawyers filed class action lawsuits on behalf of Louisiana communities. Investigative journalists published exposes that sent shockwaves through corporate America. Lone Star Petroleum's stock price collapsed overnight. Federal agencies launched criminal investigations. The Environmental Protection Agency imposed emergency cleanup orders that would cost billions. Scott's carefully constructed empire crumbled exactly as he'd predicted, but this time the destruction served justice rather than greed. For the Louisiana families, validation came after decades of being told their suffering was coincidental. Medical specialists arrived to provide comprehensive health screenings. Compensation checks began flowing from Scott's trust fund, covering medical expenses, lost wages and damages that no amount of money could truly repair. Mary Celestine, whose son was born with birth defects in 1988, broke down crying when she received official confirmation that her family's tragedy resulted from corporate negligence rather than genetic misfortune. 36 years, she sobbed during a television interview. 36 years we blamed ourselves, wondered what we did wrong. Now we finally know the truth. Camila's personal transformation was equally profound. Her father Carlos responded remarkably well to the Boston experimental treatment, his lung function improving dramatically within months. The Rodriguez family's financial crisis became distant memory as medical bills disappeared and Carlos returned to modified work schedules. But Camila's greatest change was professional. The trust fund's victim compensation program needed someone who understood both healthcare complexities and family desperation. Camila found herself managing a $500 million fund dedicated to environmental justice, coordinating medical care for hundreds of victims while ensuring their voices were finally heard. The role utilized every skill she'd developed during years of oncology nursing, but now her expertise served entire communities rather than individual patients. She worked directly with affected families, coordinated specialist referrals, and advocated for policy changes that would prevent similar cover-ups. Camila's story captured national attention, with media outlets praising her courage in exposing corporate wrongdoing despite potential risks. Environmental groups invited her to speak at conferences about the human cost of industrial contamination. Nursing organizations recognized her as an example of how healthcare professionals could advocate beyond traditional clinical settings. The case established landmark precedents for environmental law and corporate accountability. Law schools incorporated the story into curricula as an example of how individual moral courage could overcome institutional power. Medical schools used Camila's experience to teach nursing students about ethical complexities they might face when patient care revealed evidence of broader harm. The environmental justice movement gained tremendous momentum from the disclosure, with affected communities using the precedent to challenge other corporations suspected of similar cover-ups. Scientific studies of the Louisiana contamination provided valuable data about long-term health effects, leading to stronger regulatory oversight and comprehensive health monitoring in petrochemical regions. Camila's brother Miguel graduated engineering school specializing in environmental remediation technology, inspired by his sister's work to pursue careers focused on preventing industrial disasters. The Rodriguez family's success became a testament to how supporting one family member's education and career development could create opportunities benefiting entire communities. Most importantly, hundreds of Louisiana families finally received the medical care and financial support they'd been denied for nearly 4 decades. Children received treatment for birth defects. Adults accessed cancer therapies previously unaffordable. Elderly victims found dignity in their final years, knowing their suffering hadn't been meaningless. The ripple effects extended far beyond individual healing. The case proved that corporate secrets, regardless of how well protected, eventually faced exposure when individuals with access and integrity chose courage over convenience. Scott's redemption became possible only through Camila's willingness to accept extraordinary responsibility while maintaining her ethical principles. Their unlikely partnership demonstrated that meaningful change often begins with personal relationships, bridging divides of class, background, and circumstance. A dying billionaire and a struggling nurse had found common ground in their shared commitment to justice, proving that human connection could transcend every barrier when people chose compassion over self-interest. Camila's journey from desperate daughter to environmental advocate illustrated how life's most meaningful opportunities often arise from the most challenging circumstances, transforming personal pain into purpose that serves others facing similar struggles. Scott Brandon and Camila Rodriguez started as strangers from completely different worlds, a dying billionaire haunted by decades of guilt and a struggling nurse desperate to save her father. Yet their unlikely partnership proved that the most powerful force in human experience isn't money, fame, or corporate power. It's the courage to do what's right when everything inside you says it's impossible. This story teaches us that second chances aren't just about forgiveness, they're about transformation. Scott could have taken his secrets to the grave, protecting his reputation, while hundreds of families continued suffering in silence. Instead, he chose vulnerability over vanity, truth over comfort, and redemption over reputation. Camila could have taken the $50,000, helped her father, and walked away from evidence that would complicate her simple life beyond imagination. Instead, she chose justice over personal convenience, accepting responsibility that would transform her from a struggling nurse into an advocate for environmental justice. Their choices remind us that moral courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's about acting despite that fear because lives depend on our decisions. Sometimes our biggest challenges become our greatest purpose. Camila's desperate need to save her father led her to discover evidence that would save hundreds of other families facing similar struggles. Scott's terminal diagnosis forced him to confront the moral reckoning he'd avoided for 37 years, transforming his greatest shame into his most meaningful legacy. True wealth isn't measured by the zeros in your bank account or the size of your empire. It's measured by the lives you impact, the justice you create, and the courage you inspire in others. Scott died with less money but infinitely more peace than he'd known in decades. Camila gained not just financial security, but purpose that would define the rest of her life. Every ending can become someone else's beginning. Scott's death marked the start of justice for Louisiana families who'd suffered in silence for nearly 4 decades. Camila's transformation from desperate daughter to environmental advocate began with one impossible choice that changed everything. This story redefines the American dream itself. It's not about accumulating wealth or climbing social ladders. It's about using whatever power you have, however small, to create positive change in the world around you. The most extraordinary moments in life often hide within the most ordinary circumstances. A dying patient's confession, a nurse's moral dilemma, a choice between family loyalty and justice. These pivotal moments exist in all our lives, waiting for us to recognize them and respond with courage. If this story inspired you to believe in second chances, hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to remember that their choices matter, that individual courage can challenge system power, and that redemption remains possible until our final breath. Subscribe for more extraordinary stories that remind us what's possible when ordinary people make extraordinary choices. Because the world needs more Camila Rodriguez, people willing to accept responsibility for justice, even when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, or overwhelming. Comment below, what would you have done in Camila's situation? Would you have had the courage to expose the truth knowing it would destroy a dying man's legacy, but finally give hundreds of families the justice they deserved? Your answer might reveal more about your character than you expect.